Hello and welcome, friends of the paranormal. I'm your co-host Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist Patty Wilson. Patty, how are you this? I think tomorrow's the first day of fall, the autumnal equinox. So yeah, we're progressing in the calendar. But anyway, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a kind of a nice, cool evening. I've got my little shawl on for that reason. Doors are still open because I'm not giving in yet. And had a very peaceful day today. So I'm excited about the podcast because I spent most of my day working on that.
Very nice. Yeah, I've told you that fall. Well, when the end of summer comes, that's not my favorite time of year, and I will claw tooth and nail to wear shorts as long as humanly possible. So very often I'm wearing shorts into late November. That's just how
I'm
it
I'm
goes.
not I'm not that brave.
Hmm.
So I
Well,
will have my clothes out, my heavy clothes out next week, I'm sure.
and that's okay. If that's you do you, I'll do me, right?
Yep.
Right. So we would like to thank everyone for joining us for this episode. We apologize for missing last week. Things just happen, and again, we if this was our main job, we could probably be cranking out a lot more episodes. But as this is an additional duty for all of us, going back to my military days, that was anything else assigned to you was called an additional duty. We do thank you for joining us. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Click the like. If you have not joined our Facebook group or groups, we do have a couple of them. The links for those will be down below in the description. We have an email address. We'd be very happy to receive your emails. And I was talking with Patty a little bit before we started clicking the record button, and I had mentioned about getting one of her books to potentially give to or number one, have Patty sign and autograph it to whomever we determine. And the means of determining who is going to be worthy has yet to be determined. But here is the actual the actual book. I'm holding it up now, Patty. I know you can't see it, but it's her original
Right.
book. It's in for a used book. It's in terrific condition. I mean, there aren't any dog-eared pages or broken binding or anything. So I was really pleased
Wow.
to get that. So uh, keep our email address in mind, keep our Facebook groups in mind, because those are possibly some of the means we'll be looking at to determine I hate to use the term winner. That just doesn't seem appropriate. But
Right.
anyway, enough about that. And unless you had something else to add by way of announcements.
Nope, I'm doing just fine. I shall warn everybody. I have two very needy cats here today. I don't know what's going on, but literally I'm flanked from each side at this moment, and I got my hands out trying to keep them from getting into the frame.
Oh, I don't think we will mind if they come in the frame at all. But this is where I start to ask you, not start, this is where I ask you, what's our topic for today?
Okay, so I will tell everybody that I have been chewing on this topic for a year and a half easily
Ooh.
because I really
Hmm.
want to present this right, and it's a very convoluted topic in a lot of ways. So what I want to talk about is giants in the land, and I'm looking at the biblical theology versus the scientific model, and also looking into the paranormal. Because as that's the reason the show's called The Paranormalist is I've kind of delved a little bit into just about every part of the paranormal world, whether it was cryptids or UFOs, demonic cases, paranormal, ghost stuff, things like that. So I've had a little bit of a broad brush. I am not an expert in every single thing, but I have been very lucky to have been tutored by very good experts, and so I have at least a good knowledge base. There was a thing. There's a gentleman by the name of Ryan Cavallini, and Ryan is a does videos. He makes documentaries. He's a documentarian, and I highly recommend his documentaries. I know you can get them on Prime. Several years ago, probably 10 years ago, is whenever this all began, and I have been chewing on it off and on since then. But for the podcast, this started about a year and a half ago. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was at the time a MUFON director. He was a regional MUFON
Oh.
director. He had said to me that he had had some sort of activity going on in his home, and It started out, he thought, as UFO activity, but very quickly his family had become very frightened. It was getting more dark. Now, back to Ryan Cavallini. So Ryan Cavallini is doing a documentary on exorcisms and demonology, to what he had been talking to several demonologists and exorcists, and interviewing them. So he also knows this mutual friend of ours who had the UFO interest, and we all got together at a big function someplace. And over the course of time, he starts talking to this gentleman from the UFO community, and he asks him, if you have you ever thought that maybe what's going on is not UFO, meaning from outer space or from another planet or whatever you want to call it, but that it might be something a lot more nefarious. And at the time, this gentleman from the UFO community was very reluctant to go down that road, because he was very much the science guy, very intelligent, very articulate. I think he was managing 3 states at that time for MUFON. And he was like, no, I haven't. Well, to make long story short as I can, things continued to progress in his home. At the same time, Ryan's still continuing his activity on that documentary. At some point, Ryan talks to one of the demonologists or exorcists about this gentleman's case, and the gentleman says, why don't you ask him if I can come and bless his home? I think it'll help. And it was getting really dark, the things that were happening to his family, so he agreed. I think out of a sense of desperation than belief at that moment. However, as these things are manifesting in his home, and this exorcist comes and he does a cleansing and a house blessing, and he begins to work on this, when there were things that began to move in the house and things that began to happen while they're all there together. And when the exorcist began using the name of Christ, it stopped and this thing ceased, like it went away for good. You can imagine that this was a real paradigm shift for my friend from the UFO community, because the UFO community would not have ever wanted to admit such a thing had ever happened. They were hardcore science skeptics. We got the photographs, we've taken the scientific route on all of this, and there's just nothing else they're going to hear at that time. So because he's so moved by having had happen what has happened, the gentleman from the UFO community decides that at a seminar he's going to present this. He was not aware that this has been going on in private for years before that. I don't think he found that out till many years later. But he decided to present this case, and the information that the exorcist gave him, that this was satanic in nature, this was demonic in nature. And I'm not lying to you, he lost his standing in the community. They ostracized him. They literally trounced the crap out of him. And I felt bad for him, because he really just told the truth, and everybody was like, oh, he's gone crazy. So that started me thinking, what if it's all one thing? Like, what if the Bigfoot, the UFO, the werewolf, the vampire, the ghost, the ghoul, all of it, the shape-shifting thing, all of it is one thing? What if it's not 100 different stories, but just one story? And over time, I began to do a lot of reading, a lot of research, talk to a lot of different people, and it's a little more acceptable. It's a lot more acceptable today to go into the topic I'm going to go into than it would have been 5 years ago. But even at that, I still feel uncomfortable that I'm not going to be able to explain this adequately. And This is the most notes I ever did for an actual episode. I wrote 61 pages of notes today. So if you don't understand something, if there's no clarity for something, please feel free to ask. It is such a convoluted story and yet a simple one all at the same time. So all of this is going to hinge on the fact that there are books that predate the Bible. And yes, there are. So there are books, the first book of Enoch, which we've talked about before, the book of Jasher, and then of course the Old Testament, the Jewish Talmud, which is very close in a lot of ways to our Old Testament. And then, of course, over time, more books get added and what have you. Others get removed as not being canonical, which just basically means that they're not considered in divinely inspired. But the things that stay and the things that got removed all are interwoven. And so you can't make a good estimation of what's happening unless you read them all. It's like taking a novel and tearing out every third chapter and then trying to figure out the storyline. It's almost impossible. And here's where we're going to start tonight. So let us suppose, as many people believe, and I myself believe, that the Bible is an inspired history of humanity. And that is what it is. That from the very beginning of the first word written through to the very end, there was already a theme in play. And the choices that were made by both humanity and by the angelic realm would be the things that would define how this would work out. So in the very first book of the Bible, chapter 6, we know the first 5 chapters are really about how God created everything and how it all starts. And in chapter 6, you're going to find that there is a section where that God talks about the sons of God coming to be with women, humanity's women. And basically what happens is that there are these 200 seraphim, angelic beings, who are called the Watchers. And it took me a long time to understand what they were watching. They weren't here to watch us. They were here because they had been part of the war in heaven that occurred long before we were ever created. And they were here on this planet basically avoiding getting into a lot of trouble. But they came here and they found that the daughters of man were very beautiful and they were interested in them. But there's also another reason they were interested in them, because Earth had been given to humanity by God, by the divine. And in order for them to take Earth back, which they felt they had a right to because they predated us, they decided that they would take it through the right of inheritance. So when you married, according to the law as it was then, the woman's portion, whatever her portion would have been in the inheritance, would have fallen to her husband. It is very clear in these documents that in the Bible that they didn't just rape them or have sex with them. They married them. And they made a deal with the fathers that if they could have these particular women and marry them, they would give them what we would call today arcane knowledge, but it was forbidden knowledge, things we didn't need to know because they weren't good for us to know, like the art of war, how to bend metal into implements of war, how to use pharmaceuticals for illicit purposes, things like that. Makeup, believe it or not, and there's going to be a reason why that's important somewhere down this pike, but how to make rouges and color our faces and all of that. And so this is how this all starts. Now, there are people who will say that the sons of God was just simply saying human sons, because they were sons of God. But in every other place in the Bible where the term sons of God is used, it is used in such a way as to indicate that these were spiritual beings. And there is a specific phrase that they use in ancient Hebrew. and Greek and Aramaic. And if you go through every language it's ever been translated in, it always remains that way. That means a spiritual being, not a human being. So we're going to assume that. And it says that these men, these and these sons of God and these women mated, and that they bore them children, and that these children are the Nephilim. Some of them are large, huge. Some of them are tiny. So they are, by their very nature, it appears, shapeshifters. And what you hear in Genesis is very little of what actually happens. Go to the book of Enoch and go to the book of Jasher, because both of those books, which are also referenced in the Bible, because they would have already have assumed that you already had those books at hand, because most Jewish homes did, that you can go into those books and read large things, large explanations of what was going on, and it's going to make it a lot more clear. I will reference some of that here as well. So these beings have been created, these Nephilim. The females who gave birth to these Nephilim, it is said, were turned to sirens. Now, that sounds crazy, except for, here's the thing. As a human being, how could they give birth to these things? So these angels, the watchers, literally had the ability to shapeshift or to change themselves and others. And so they changed the females into sirens so that they were able to bear the children. Those that did not get changed most often died. And I want to tell you, you can go to the writings in Egypt and the writings in the Roman Empire, and you can find there are firsthand accounts from Egypt in the very early days of them talking about Nephilim tearing the mother in half when they were born. And these are not religious writings. These were like legal writings by the scholars and the doctors and what have you. And they are not biblical in that respect, but they are definitely confirming things. Now, as we go through all of that, the concept of the Nephilim is what sort of changes things for all of humanity. And these beings, they have a real problem. The angels are what they are, that what God made them. And they can travel from one dimension to another dimension. They are able to shapeshift. They can travel to different realms. They can do all of this. It appears that the Nephilim could shapeshift. They may even be able to change from one realm to another, but they didn't have something that they really wanted and needed, and that is a soul. Only humanity has those. And so when they went crazy, they went wild, and it talks in multiple different books you can read from those time frames, all of them, that these Nephilim they had an appetite that was just unquenchable. They literally ate everything they could find, and they ate humans. They began to eat humans, and there was all kinds of barbaric practices, raping women and torturing people, and that was just wild and insane. And that is what, and they were marrying into the bloodlines of almost every person, and that is what influenced God to create the flood, to basically recorrect the bloodline situation. And the reason that Noah was chosen was because his bloodline was the one that was yet pure. None had sullied it at that point. And I know this is a lot of biblical stuff, and you're like, what does this have to do with anything? But it's going to make everything else make sense. So when the Nephilim were killed, because they can be killed, they couldn't go anywhere. Like, they lost their physical body, but because they are also half angelic, they could move in spirit, but they couldn't leave the planet. They couldn't ascend to heaven. They couldn't do that. and they are what created demons. They are demons. That is where demons came from. They're not the fallen angels, like most people think. There are fallen angels that are very bad beings. That's true, but they're not demons in that respect. These things are stuck here on the planet and they're angry and they're frustrated and they want to hurt. What they see is the being that caused all this, which would be the human side, because the soul didn't cross over. So that's where I want to start. And I know it's a long start and I apologize. I don't usually take so long, but in order to set the framework for this, I wanted to kind of give that to everybody so we're all at least on the same page. Okay, there are multiple places in the Bible where they talk about the Nephilim, and then it goes into demons and all of that. And we do know from the biblical accounts that they were the angels that were the watchers were the seraphim. We know that the seraphim were in their natural state. They were almost like reptilian-like, if you will. And that might come to other things later on. And there aren't just Nephilim. There's Anakim, there's Raphaim. There are at least 7 different varieties of Nephilim. That's the overall arching term, but they're specific and they're split up. And some of them could shapeshift, some of them couldn't. As like I said, some of them are very small, some of them are huge, 15, 20, 25 feet tall. And this is something that you might say, well, this is ridiculous. It doesn't happen today. Well, yeah, I'm going to tell you some stories here in a little bit that it does seem to happen today. It's been happening forever. So if you go to the book of Numbers in the Bible, just so you know where to go to look if you're interested, the Nephilim and the Anakim were in the land of Canaan. So when you look at the in the Bible where it talks about the Jewish people being told to like kill off entire nations, that's what they were killing off. They were killing off the Nephilim, and the different varieties of them is what they're talking about. And so, which makes it make a lot more sense when you start reading some of this stuff. Now, I'm going to try to get out of the biblical component of it and get into more modern day, because there's just a lot. You could go on in here forever, but that's not what I want to talk about. So giants suddenly appear in our history, in our timeline. But you can go back in history as far as you want to go back. You can go back to where David slew Goliath. Goliath was considered one of those giants. You can go back to everywhere throughout the entire Old Testament. They talk about coming up against these beings that are, 20 foot tall or 3 times the size of a man or 700 pounds or stuff like that, 13 feet tall. And they're there. But in our own records, you will find that these beings are here. In the Bible, they called them the Gibborim, and they are the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Gibborim. That's the generalized term, the Gibborim. I don't know why Nephilim became the one everybody went to, but if you're reading it, it would be the Gibborim. Now, I kind of wanted to move on to the next section, so bear with me here, because I want to talk a little bit about some of the other accounts beyond the Bible. So let's talk about Marco Polo, our early explorers. It was not every nation in the world has giant bones. They have stories of giants. They have I'm going to talk about a place where they have a museum and they have axes that are 3 times the height of a man that they have unearthed. And these axes were supposed to be war axes for these ancient people. Think about what I just said. These things are huge. We're talking 15 feet long. No human being could possibly pick them up. But so, it's everywhere. But we're going to start with some specific cases. So Marco Polo, on his journeys, he ends up in Zanzibar. Now, Marco Polo writes in his journals about his time in Zanzibar. And he notes that the practice of idolatry of having a king in their own language and paying tribute is something that they're very, very stuck on doing. And he says that there's an abundance of, trade and what have you. And he writes these letters back and he's talking about all the good stuff that's there and how in Zanzibar, this is a great place. But he also talks about other things. He talks about meeting these giants that were 10 to 12 feet tall, the largest human beings he had ever seen in his life. And he says, this is how he describes it. He says, he mentions, most notably in this section of is a rare appearance of Marco Polo's notation of race in the people he met. In Zanzibar, he writes in this account that the people were quite black and in an infrequent occasion when Marco Polo noted that the skin color of the people was different, he also stated that he had that this is his exact words, altogether their appearance is quite repulsive, and he concluded in his narrative that the people of Zanzibar, he wrote, anyone who saw them in another country would say that they are devils. Now, that might sound terrible and it might sound racist, but I don't think it's that at all. He went all over the world and he saw all colors of people and all kinds of people. There was something different about this group of people. They were extremely large. Their faces were different. Their features weren't humanoid in the way we were used to them being arranged. You're going to come across this time after time. And again, Marco Polo mostly wrote about what he found, the goods that he could market, that kind of stuff. He wasn't giving a travel blog. So he we met this group of people and this is what we talked about, and they're willing to trade with us on this and this. He didn't talk about anything else. But he also said things like they had large noses, their mouths were very wide cut, that he said it was aberrant to watch them move, giving the impression that they moved in a herky-jerky way that wasn't normal for humans to walk. So that tells me, again, there's something different, vastly different. Let's go to Magellan, the explorer Magellan. In 1519, he was in Sucukar de Barrameda. He was trying to find passage to India by sailing westward. That's what gets Columbus and a whole bunch of other people out there exploring as well. He had 5 ships when he sailed. He's carrying, he goes all through, that region, and there's a lot of really horrible things that happen. He gets puts into land, he gets attacked by natives, he has, ships sinking at sea, all kinds of craziness happens. After 3 years, one ship goes back to his homeland. There's 18 survivors. Magellan does not make it back home. He's killed during the expedition. And survivors won't talk about what happened. They are traumatized. The document said that they were scared and terrified and scarred, and they refused to speak about what they had endured. But one of them, Antonio Pagafetta, had kept a journal, and his journal would later be discovered, and it would explain what happened to them. So Magellan is going along going along the coast of South America. He's in the area that's now Argentina, and it's winter, and he decides that it's really not a smart idea to keep his ships moving through the waters throughout the winter. The men are hungry, they're tired, they're cold, they don't have any way to stay warm on board a ship. So he decides to move to land and set up a little camp, and they'll weather it out there where there's at least wood for fires and they can hunt. It makes perfect sense. So they pause there for the winter and they're going to sail in the spring. That's pretty much the way it worked, except this is what happened. They found that the people of this land wore no clothes, even though it was the middle of winter. And they were warned by these people to not stay in the area that they're in because there were these strange beings there that would kill them. At first, the sailors thought that these were Aborigines and they were, being superstitious. And then they started exploring a little further away from their little camp, and they found these huge footprints. Pigafetta said that they were several days there. They had found the prints in the sand. They had found them um, on the loam and the dry land, and he said that a group of them, including Magellan, were moving along trying to find, food and kind of reconnoiter what they could use. And they saw in the distance a giant man, twice the size of a normal man. In his journal, he wrote, he was naked and dancing and jumping and throwing dust on his head. Magellan and the entire crew with him saw this. And they thought at first maybe this was like a sign of peace or something, because like he was like being, you know, being humble or something, putting the dirt on his head. But having done that, they are standing there quietly. Magellan says to one of the guys, go see if you can talk with them. Go see if you can make communication.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to be that person. Like I would be
Hmm.
like, are you kidding me? You're the leader.
Yeah, I bet he had a red shirt on. Yeah.
I'm telling you. So having them, the guy goes up to him. I have to give the guy credit because he was a tough dude if he actually went up and did this. But he went up and he tried to like be humble and like show him open hands and like try to let him know that like we just want peace, we're not going to hurt you, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, it didn't work out well for them. So the man, he kind of turns around. He's like, I don't know what to do. He wasn't being the giant wasn't aggressive, but he decided to follow them. So he follows them all the way back to their camp. And he comes into the camp, and it says in the journal, Magellan marveled greatly and made signs of peace. And this being also would put one finger upward, and every time he would say, where did you come from? Now, of course, he didn't speak English. I don't know, but he would point up when they would ask questions. He would just keep pointing up at the air. And they began to believe perhaps he came out of the sky somehow. He was so tall that we reached only to his waist, he wrote. Think about that. He was well proportioned, and we learned later that this race of giants were called the Patagons, hence Patagonia. That which means actually big-footed. And of course, the land they came from is now known as Patagonia. The giant inhabitants were gentle by nature, at least the ones they first encountered. But in Pigafetta's diary, he also talks about the ship Chaplain in the Francis Drake expedition, which would go out subsequently. There were 5 ships, and this is one of the 5 ships. And so he gets moved from ship to ship from time to time. And they met these Patagonians, and the chaplain would write that the ones would estimate that their height, the ones that they met on the second journey, was somewhere between 7.5 and 11.5 feet tall. Now, this is interesting because 15 years later, and independent of having been part of the Magellan thing, another English sailor by the name of Anthony Kivett was shown the bodies of a man who he estimated to be 12 feet tall. And he met other of these beings that were equally tall. And then beyond that, on another occasion, an Englishman by the name of William Adams came to the same general area, and he said, we came into conflict with extremely tall natives in the Terra de Fuego, which we heard they had other previous encounters with the English, meaning at this point, probably just meaning people from Europe. The Patagonian giants last were reported as being seen in 1766. English Commodore John Byron claimed that he had seen a tribe of 9-foot tall beings that were in a village outside of certain port in Patagonia. In later editions of the book that Commodore Byron would put out, it was interesting that somebody edited his book. The first, after he died, somebody came along who had the copyrights to the book and edited it, and they changed it from his original 9-foot tall to there were only 6.5 feet tall. But the original volumes, there still are copies of the original volumes in libraries and museums, so we know that what the original copies said. And here's the first time you see somebody trying to edit history because it doesn't fit a narrative that's about to be I can't talk, perpetuated upon the world. So we know that there were Patagonian giants. We have multiple eyewitnesses who put down in multiple venues the information. And interestingly enough, they kind of bolster each other. They sound very similar. Now, at the same time that Magellan's making his travels, there's by another person, a Spaniard by the name of Alfonso Alvarez de Pineda, and he is in the Gulf of Mexico is where he ends up, and he makes a discovery. Now, this is interesting. It says, among other important discoveries, he was the first person to understand that Florida was not an island, but a peninsula, and he is the first European to see the Mississippi River. The first natives he met wore jewelry of pure gold, and that sparked his interest, I'll bet, and he decided to explore the Gulf. Now, he found he found that instead of gold, there were other things that were more spectacular. He explored Texas, and he came across very, very small people, which he would call pygmies, while there were other tribes of people that were very large and then regular-sized normal human beings. And his diary, he writes, and this is a quote, 10 or 12 palms in height about the larger beings. And although at the time there were different interpretations of, what an average height would have been, we do know that these beings were, large enough to have caused him to be impressed by them. Now, beyond that, let's look at Pineda was impressed by the giants, and he named the river in the area where he found them as the Rio das Palmas, or the Palms River. And in 1529, a cartographer by the name of Diego Roberto labeled it on the maps as the Rio the Giantes, meaning the Rio Grande. These were such large beings that literally the river was named for them. They were easily 10 foot tall. Now, a Spanish explorer, Hernando de Soto, in 1542, he ended up, exploring what's Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, and he came across a Native American tribes, what he thought that were called the Tuscalucas, and they were really impressive. It says he was taken to the chief, and although the people were the same height as the Spaniards, he found that the chief, Tuscaluca, was significantly bigger, a giant by De Soto's standards. He asked for supplies, and the chief agreed to give him some, but instructed the Spaniard to go get them at his fort, meaning Tuscaluca's fort, and that was not far away. So the greedy De Soto took Tuscaluca hostage and made him lead the Spanish army to the fort at gunpoint, with the intention of pillaging it. Once there, Tuscaluca freed himself and ordered his people to attack the Spaniards. The native killed most of them and with bows and arrows, and beheaded the corpses. And De Soto survived and later counterattacked, setting the fort on fire. But he died anyway due to a fever shortly after that. During the battle, the Spanish army searched the scorched ruins of the old fort and found most of the natives dead. Among the burned corpses was the corpse of Tuscaloosa, of the son of Tuscaloosa. Apologize. But the chief himself, they claimed, walked through the fire and was never found. He didn't die. They didn't find him burned elsewhere. He was just gone. When Cortez got to Mexico in 1519, he found a small group of European people who were facing the Aztecs, who were a very powerful and warlike people. And I could go on. This is all over we're all over this nation, all over the world, but there's a huge concentration in North and South America, an absolutely astounding concentration of these stories. Cortez has the distinction. This is a fascinating little piece of information here, so I'll share this with you. So Cortez, he makes a treaty with the Talalacans, which are warring with the Aztecs, and for several months the Spaniards live with them, and they receive food. They actually take wives. They kind of listen to all the stories, learn the language, that kind of thing. The Aztecs are a powerful rival, but these people, that they're living with, the Tuscalacans, they tell the Spanish that the reason the Aztecs are so powerful is because they are protected by supernatural beings that they believed to be gods who lived in the mountain. And they would see these beings, and these beings gave them weapons that the Tuscaloosa said that they had come against this race of giants at one point and had managed to beat them back. And the Cortez and his guys, like, they were laughing. They were just doing it. They literally were making fun of these people. They're telling these crazy stories. And then a few days later, somebody was leading them somewhere to to go get supplies, and they stop at this area, and this native tells them this is where the battle had been. This is where that battle we told you about had been with the giants. And the Spanish decide to poke around, and this is what he says they found. We found a large amount of human bones, the remains of those giants. The expedition's chronicler, Bernal de la Castillo, wrote that in his journal that night. To show us how big these giants had been, they brought us the leg bone of one, which was very thick and the height of an ordinary man, and it was the leg bone from the hip to the knee. I measured myself against it. It was as tall as I am. Sounds a little bit like a giant to me. And he makes a point of saying, and I am thought to be of a reasonable height. We were astonished by the sight of the bones and felt certain that there truly must be giants in this land. Cortez said that we ought to send the leg bone to Castile so His Majesty can see it, which we did by the first available agents to go there. With the help of the Tlaxcalans, the giant killers, Cortez was able to subjugate the Aztecs, and he learned more from these Indians about the giants. Many Native Americans would speak of the gruesome battles they fought against a giant race of humanoids. Eventually, humans won, and the giants were vanquished from their land. It's interesting that they almost always describe the giants this way. Here we go. The giants had white skin, red hair, 6 fingers, 6 toes, 2 rows of teeth. Everywhere in North America, they would come with it. And some of them, they said, had red beards. The Chippewa, the Sandusky, the Tawa tribes also told of these particular races. They also said there would be a couple that in each group of these giants that would have black hair and black beards, but most of them were definitely red. The ones that had the black bearded giants were finally wiped out. Chief Tuscaloosa, we call them the Black Warriors. And he said the last representative of the Black Giants remains could be found all over North America. At what's now Ashtabula County, Ohio, there's a burial site with a number of graves estimated to be between 10 and 12 feet tall. It's fascinating. And every state in this country, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, there's Tennessee, almost every state has these giants. It's just a really fascinating story. Now, what does that have to do with the Nephilim? There is a belief that the Nephilim either survived, many of them survived the flood, or the survivors mated with humans after the flood, creating more of these beings, and that these beings split up. So remember I said that there was like 5 or 6 different names for them: the Elohim, the Rephaim, the Anakim, all of these. They split up into tribes based upon their hair color, their who their parentage was, and they came from the Middle East and that region, and they start moving around the world, and they travel and they leave smaller groups behind them and move forward again, looking for places to settle. And these beings they believe are the Nephilim, and that's where you get the demigod idea. So some of them were also born looking human, or at least able to stay in a human form, and that's where you get the stories about the demigods and all of that. And so we're going to start talking about some of those things. One of the most fascinating sites is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. They have found tall skeletons there. There was a gentleman by the name of Professor Frederick Ward Putnam. Putnam was an advocate for protecting the mounds all over the country. And of course, if you know the history of what happened to all the mounds were dug out. They were, whatever relics could be taken were taken. We do know that a lot of the local people would take souvenirs, if you would, and a lot of them ended up in like little museums, and then eventually there would be newspaper articles. There's over 5,000 articles from the newspaper from like the beginning of the 1800s to the mid 1800s, where they're just local newspaper articles that have been dug up and found, where it says, like such and such was found, and it was taken to the sheriff's office or to such and such doctor, and they've put it in this little, curiosity room or what have you. And then this article appears, and then eventually the Smithsonian is created, and they start looking for those articles, and then they start coming and asking to take these relics away. We'll get there in a minute. Almost all of these in the United States were, as I said, there was a small amount of the black-bearded, black-haired ones, but most of them were the red-haired giants. And the story is that the red-haired giants and the black-haired giants split apart, and they became enemies, and they fought each other, and the remnants of the red-haired ones won, and the remnants of the red-haired ones, they were worn out, tired, had been in a long series of wars with the other giants, and the native people ended them because they would take native people, they would kill them and eat them, they would mate with them sometimes, and that takes us to the fact that we have like places like Lovelock Cave in the early 1900s. They found the remnants of 2 males and a female. They were inside of the cave, out of the weather, and they basically had mummified. So there is a really good set of specimens, and they the local newspapers and the local doctor who examined them. The woman was 7 foot tall. The men were, one was 10 and one was almost 12 foot tall. And they had all the classic things that we've talked about: the double rows of teeth, the 6 fingers and toes, the long red hair, and the skin was obviously leathery, but it wasn't dark. So they could tell that it was, a Caucasian of some sort. These were removed and stored, and an article appeared about them. They were put in a little local museum of history, and the Smithsonian came and took them, and they have disappeared, along with a lot of other relics of the same stuff. And the story that the local natives, the area where they were found is a Paiute Native American country, and the Paiute had a legend that they called these people, the Lovelock Cave people, the Sitka. The Sitka had, as I said, had eaten humans. They would steal children. They would rape women. And so when these people got hunted and forced into that cave, the Paiute people's legend or story is that they piled wood and brush at the entrance and shot flaming arrows from a distance, entombing the giants in the cave. In the 1920s, a young woman by the name of Sarah Wakama, she is the daughter of a Paiute chieftain, and she tells this story to a guy who turned out to be an anthropologist in the area, and she produced a lock of red hair. And she said, "This has been in my family for generations." And the scientist was really amazed. It was definitely, red hair. He would, start working on it. But interestingly enough, before he ever managed to convince anybody to put money into a project, two local men were digging for dung inside the cave and unearthed the 3 skeletons. And as I said, they were found, they were chronicled, there were photographs of it, and there they were. Now, the Sitka giants also roamed other areas in California, in Nevada. There are stories. Right before the Mexican-American War in 1833, there were a group of Mexican soldiers in Lompoc, California, who were ordered to dig a pit for storing powder. While they were digging the pit, with pickaxes, and the help of a few local people, they found the bones of what turned out to be human skeletons of a person 12 feet tall. The giant's jaws had not one but 2 sets of teeth, and whoever had buried this person, they had put in what are called burial offerings. The native people recognized them as such. These included stone axes, horse pottery, carvings, and hieroglyphics carved onto stone. When the natives saw the skeleton, they panicked. Their chief came afterward to the Mexican camp and demanded that the remains be reburied at an unknown location. The Mexican authorities were fine with that. They agreed. And the area is now inaccessible. The area where they agreed to bury it is now the Vandenberg Space Force Station. But mummies of ancient giants have been found all over the United States. In 1940, there was mummies found in other caves, and they were buried, reburied, because they had wrappings on them, and people didn't want to disturb them. They were accidentally disinterred, so they put them back. But it was stated that they had these fine woven mats wrapped around them, and they were basically mummies. One was a female and one was a male. Both of them were later disinterred and taken to a museum. It made the newspapers, and they were forgotten until 1996, when an anthropologist from the University of California, Professor Taylor, thought that they would be perfect for a experiment, and he conducted experiments at the university using a spectrometer, and to his amazement, the apparatus gave an impossible date of 10,000 years before the present time, when there were not supposed to be inhabitants living in North America. Machine was recalibrated. It gave the same answer. It's done so several other times. The Bureau of Land Management has seized the mummies with the excuse of returning them to the Paiute area. 1990 Native American Grave Protection Restoration Act was enacted, and any human remains that was found and taken from Native American lands were then re-interned. However, the Paiute do not say that they were Paiute. They just say that these were people that were Caucasian. There's a place called Spirit Cave where red-haired and bearded giants were known to come out of the ground. They were, again, Anglo-Saxon or Caucasian. Christopher Columbus talked about seeing them, and we could go on and on. They literally are the Norse. Every nation, every group of people in this world have stories. Leif Erikson claimed to have met these things, whatever they were. And then I want to go in next week and talk about modern sightings, because believe it or not, there are modern sightings of giants today, not just a long time ago. And an interesting thread is being woven now, that all of these beings we see, the vampires, the werewolves, all of that are literally Nephilim, either disembodied or that are still here, and they're participating. And now they're talking about there being families that are hybrids. So basically what they're talking about is that there are human families who have been in service to the Nephilim for generations. And these families give up a child, and that child is then used to mate, to continue to create Nephilim. And they keep that bloodline from thinning out too much by keeping it all in that same family. Then that person's family will also have to give up that, whoever that person is. Maybe it's a woman, maybe one of her children will have to be used for mating, things like that. Now that might sound kind of way out there and far-fetched. There have been independently, and prior to this becoming something that the world's been talking about, two people who have come forward with some really compelling evidence that they have been in a family like that. They were born into a family like that. We're going to talk about all of that next time, give you a lot more information. And again, I have sightings as of 4 months ago. So with that, I'm going to stop here for tonight. I hope that all of this information kind of making you understand that there's this thread that's running through our history. And whatever this thread is, it's been here forever. And whatever it is, this is the thing that convinces me there's something more to this story. The government has gone to great lengths over the course of time to find all of the giant bones that they could locate, and then to collect them all at the Smithsonian. And people will say, oh, that's a legend, that's this, that's that. There was a court case that happened about 5 years ago. And if you want me to, I will dig up all the court specs for you for next week. Let me know, and I will go through the entire court case with you. And it was alleging that people that they had taken these artifacts from, the Smithsonian would leave like a letter stating, we are taking in receipt, one skeletal remains, and then what they would describe it to some extent. And then they would give it to the little local museum, or they would give it to whoever they took the stuff from as proof that it was now theirs, or they might buy it for $10 and that was a receipt. And so a group of these people got together and they filed a lawsuit stating that their stuff was taken, that it wasn't willingly given. Like they came in and they said, you have to give it to us. We're the government, and we want to keep this for the whole nation, so you have to give this to us. And they wanted their artifacts back. And this lawsuit went on for about 2.5 years, and eventually The judge he said, I want to see the artifacts. I want to make sure that, they're there. And they've never been put on display. They were supposedly hidden in the bowels of the Smithsonian. They've never made it out there for other people to see. At that time, the Smithsonian came to the judge and said, "Hey, dude, we're sorry, but one of our previous curators, actually the gentleman who started the Smithsonian, and then we can go into who he was because that was a little shady too. Anyway, he didn't think that these artifacts were not that they weren't important, but that he didn't want them out there because he didn't want to muddy the waters. Like a lot of people had invested a lot of their careers in telling a story a certain way. And these artifacts blew that story out of the water. So he decided, because he was one of them, he had written books on the subject. He was, a lecturer on these subjects. He had a lot of friends who were in all of this. They all had this nice little consensus. Yep, this is how it works. That he put them on a ship and sent them out into the Potomac where they were dumped. That's what they say. I don't believe they were dumped. I think they're still there, but they don't want the world to see them. But he did not deny that they existed. That's the point that you need to take from this. Just that a previous curator had destroyed them. And that's where we're going to end for tonight and pick it up next week. Please let me know what you think about all of this. And think about it a little bit throughout the week, because they could all be part of the same chain of events. These Nephilim are shapeshifters. They're able to move through, through time. They don't die at the same rate we do. They could be a few hundred years old, and there are some really compelling arguments being made that they go into hiding and come back out at some point, and that you can see and pinpoint them throughout history. And we'll talk a little bit about that too next week.
All
So,
right.
what do you think, Stu?
Well, I have my own theories,
Okay.
but and they don't necessarily coincide with, the one thing. It's all one thing. So I still hold the thought that there are many different extraterrestrial races who have had their fingers in things. So
Okay.
we'll never know. I mean, even if,
Probably not.
if somebody does know, we'll never know.
Yep. I don't see anybody
Mhm.
willingly telling us anything. I mean, we're still not 100% sure about things that happened like 30 years ago, or literally things that happened a week ago. We just don't have answers because they don't tell us the answers, or they tell us 5 different answers, and then we can't tell which one's true, if any of them are. But there are this, and this is not an isolated thing. So the idea that somebody would go out throughout history and scrub history, I used to think that sounded a little crazy, but then I started like realizing that there are countries that we never heard of that were on maps in the 1200s and in the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1782. And then around 1900, they just started pulling all that material out. And you go, why? Does it matter if we knew that such and such was there?
Well, as long as there's been history, people have been rewriting it. So who's to say?
Yeah. But that's a pretty coordinated
But
effort. Like I could see a person rewriting something because it didn't make them look good or their group of people look good. But we're talking about around the world, it really got wiped. And it's been coming back. Like people are now, you were telling me about going out looking for a globe, and people are finding old globes in attics and old maps and things like that and old books, and they were isolated, and they were like, oh, I don't know what that is. That must have been a joke or something. But now, because of the internet, people are starting to put in the same words, and they're bumping into each other, and they're like, holy crap, I'm not the only one that saw that. And it's interesting that it was worth somebody's time to do. Because like, to the rest of me, I don't know about you, but if, like, I know there's countries that don't exist now that used to exist, and people change names and they've changed hands and stuff like that. That's just life. We all get
Mhm.
that. So it wouldn't have been a big deal. So what makes that a big enough deal to go to all that trouble? I don't know, but I find it interesting. It's a question I have in the back of my head. And it may not seem like it's paranormal, but it is because it touches on so many parts of the paranormal subject and us being able to understand the world with truth. Like, I just want to know the truth. So I'll be curious to see if anybody like writes in or anything and um adds a piece or wants to, disagree. That's okay. You can disagree. I am not married to anything. I understand other people have different opinions. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. We can talk about it. We can hash it back and forth, whatever. I'm that kind of a person. Because if you don't listen to everybody's opinion, you don't know where the truth is because maybe they know something I don't.
All right. Well, if that sounded like a conclusion, so I will
That
say
is.
I will say good night so that you may say
Good night, everybody.